Girls have read it to have rejected people. What's the worst way someone's taken it? I'd actually heard of a lot of people doing this before, but never had it happen to me. And when it did, it was completely devastating. He told me I had to go out with him, or he would end himself. He then said goodbye, very convincingly, and emotionally turned his phone off / stopped picking up or answering any texts. I knew him from when we went to high school together, so I actually had his best mates and his dad's phone numbers. I phoned them and sent the screenshots of the messages to them. Absolutely hysterical and worrying that he was in a gutter somewhere. However, it was very quickly frickin' discovered by his livid father that he was actually at a friend's house smoking weed. He just thought that this would at least get him a pity bang. What a complete and utter jerk. Guilting someone with your mental health is never fair, whether true or not. The fact it's not true just makes you an even bigger D-bag. Screw this guy. Story 2. When I was a nanny, I was walking around with the baby in the pram and we visited a bookshop. A man in there started talking to me and then asked me out. Very kindly, keeping my father's advice in mind about being kind when I have to reject men when they ask me out, I said it was a nice offer, but my boyfriend might not be too keen on it. His response to that was to lean in and try to kiss me. I told him to get the hell off me. He then exploded with rage and started screaming in my face. I was saved by the bookstore employee and the man stormed out of the shop. I spent the next few hours shaking like a leaf. What a champion, that employee. Story 3. He shoved me into a wall and busted my head open. I was taking a break at work behind the building, listening to music and enjoying the breeze. And coworker I constantly tried to avoid because he was a creep started asking me out. I'd already been irritated because of crappy customers and the overbearing heat inside, so instead of the usual brush-off reply, I snapped at him. I made it clear I was in no way interested. I had a boyfriend whom I loved and that he needed to get the hell out of my personal space. I went to walk away and he grabbed my arm to twist me around, trying to back me against the wall. And when I finally managed to rip my arm away and press him back to get him off me, he got mad and shoved me. Back of my head hit the wall, split open about 1.5 inches. Bled a lot and had to get about 7 stitches. He got fired and was arrested for assault. He tried to say I had hit him first, but luckily there was a camera around back that caught the whole thing. Edit. I went through the thread and thought I would address some things. I apologize in advance for this wall of text, but I'm on mobile. I was 19 when this happened and he was 21. No one really liked him because he was a jerk. He thought he knew better than everyone else. And he only put half of his effort into everything and constantly got in people's way. He also asked out every female worker multiple times and was really pushy about it. Made us all extremely uncomfortable just to be around him, because he didn't seem to understand personal space when it came to anyone female. We were all constantly telling him to back off. We worked the same shift because he kept getting rotated around for problems. And finally they left him where he was because he only harassed me. And I was the only one who didn't seem bothered, aka I didn't complain. Which I realized later I should have, because it might have gotten him fired sooner before this all went down. Because I was the only female on shift, he would always try to get with me. It never worked. And I found ways to keep my distance. The day he busted my head open, the heat and the long day combined, and I snapped at him instead of just walking away like I normally did, which was obviously something he hadn't been expecting. So he grabbed me and tried to hold me back while yelling about me being a female dog. I ended up with a bruise shaped like his hand that I didn't notice till I got to the hospital. After he shoved me and I hit the wall, I started yelling at him, and he was freaking out a bit because for once I was actively standing up for myself. And he started to realize what he'd just done. He only flipped out for real and started apologizing a mile a minute when I reached back and my hand came back, covered in blood. I went inside, still yelling at him, and our manager came over to snap at me until I told him what happened and showed him my bloody hand. He turned me to check out my head and panicked. Unfortunately for the idiot still apologizing, our uniform shirt was white and the back of mine wasn't anymore. I know head wounds bleed a lot, but it looked like I'd been hurt way worse than I was. I even freaked out at how much blood there was once I took the shirt off. I got taken to the hospital and the cops were called and they arrested him later. We found out he was on parole or probation for punching his girlfriend in the face earlier in the year and kicking her dog around afterwards. He was in jail for a good 7 years after the fact. All I did was give a report on what had happened, and the tape proved my story. I never went to court. I was 19, and this really wasn't that big of a deal to me. The injury wasn't that bad. I was in the hospital longer for questioning than anything else. I was almost completely stitched up before the police even came. All I had was a tiny hairline fracture, not even a concussion. I was more PO'd than anything. I didn't even think to sue. But I had bigger things to deal with at that point in my life than some idiot at work, and I sort of just moved on after everything. The fact the dude tried to turn it around on OP is just so gross. I mean, everything about this guy is gross, right? Punching his girlfriend, kicking the dog around after. Oh, come on, man. What a piece of garbage. But then to try to blame it on OP because he panicked and he didn't know what to do getting caught. Oh, whatever. This man has zero of my sympathy. You had your chances. One too many, I'd say, but you had them. Story 4. I'd gone out with a guy once that I'd met through a dating site, and we just, didn't click. I told him exactly that. Was very respectful of his feelings and wished him the best. He was, not receptive at all. He called me a harlot, told me he was going to find where I lived and push me into oncoming traffic, just really awful things. He wouldn't stop texting me horrible stuff, calling me names and saying I was leading him on, and that he hoped somebody assaulted me. I blocked his number, which thankfully stopped the messages, reported him on the dating app, and thankfully never heard from him again. It was legit one of the scariest freaking things. Dude was unhinged. I feel like nowadays saying dodged a bullet is a little overused in some ways. But OP, believe me when I say you dodged a mortar, because all this pent up whatever he has going on, that's coming out sooner or later, even if you didn't reject him. As OP said, dude was just unhinged. Story 5. He sent me an email with a 3-page essay attached. It was written entirely in third person, recounting his first rejection by a girl named Tanya at the age of 16. There were a lot of solitary beach walks, she's the perfect girl talk, him not taking no for an answer, and the story eventually ends with him drinking antifreeze, slipping into a coma, hospitalized, and eventually recuperating, only to tell poor Tanya that she could have avoided his and his parents' pain by agreeing to date him. The email said, "So you know what you are getting into." I was 19 and did not see this extreme level of crazy coming, but knew I needed to make it really clear how I felt. I immediately called him to reiterate that I do not want to be with him, and I no longer want to be friends with him, and if he contacted me again, I would change my number. I let a friend of his know what was going on. 5 days later, he called me from a different number to tell me he was out in the country with a gun to his head, and if I didn't agree to be with him, then he was pulling the trigger. I lied and convinced him I had to leave because I had a family emergency and sick in the hospital, but we would talk the next day. Had mutual friend call him and report back, and as I suspected, he was full of crap. He called the next day and with the most sing-song, creepy, serial murderer tone said, "You think you're so nice. What kind of crappy human being doesn't agree to what someone needs when they tell you they're gonna end themselves? You piece of crap." I lost the plot. Told him, I'm changing my numbers, and the next time he contacts me, the police will be involved. He just laughed the whole time and told me he hopes I die alone like I deserve. Radio silence for 6 years until I'm getting married. I have an email from him that says, "Hey, wow, it's been a while, how are you? Would be so great to catch up someday." Frickin' psychotic jerk. Obviously, I never replied and changed my email again. Story 6. Back in high school, he pretended to want the same friendship I was looking for. He ended up locking me in his room, threw my phone out of reach, and assaulted me until I worked my way free. As I sat in my car, he casually walked out, handed me my phone, telling me he would text me later, and I got to learn to live with him in classes while he acted like nothing happened. Edit. I want to clear up what happened afterwards. I didn't report him because I considered him such a good friend for a considerably long time. The experience luckily didn't amount to full penetration. At the time, I wasn't entirely sure it was assault. Things like maybe I asked for it or I'm just overreacting ran through my mind. It was a year afterward when I finally came to the realization, and by that time I both didn't care and, sorry to say this, didn't want to see a kid who was successful in college and in a healthy long-term relationship be brought down by rumors. Not what I'd want to call it, but what a majority of the world would today. This isn't a great answer, but it's the only answer I have for my inaction. OP, I want you to know I'm with you here, okay? Being a victim, sometimes you don't even know you're a victim until later. And even when you do, or when you realize, it's hard to come forward about it for a lot of reasons. It's a lot of just hassle, emotionally and just practically, and look, all I want to say is I get it. And I hope OP doesn't feel guilty for not saying anything when they quote-unquote should have, because it's just not a super easy or even sometimes feasible thing to do. But it does sound like an awful experience, OP, and for that, I obviously am sorry. Although I know that doesn't mean anything, really. Story 7. Went into a gas station to get my mom some lottery tickets, and the cashier asks for my ID. While holding my ID, he begins to question my marital status, among other personal details. I told him I wasn't interested and paid. He gives me my ID back. I go to the car, start it up, and begin to tell my little sister what happened as she was waiting in the car. And she starts yelling that someone is coming over. Now the cashier is tapping my window and yelling, "Are we friends?" I put the car in reverse and drove away. While I don't know for certain who did it, the next day I had my tire slashed. I was told that the way my tire looked seemed like it was most likely intentional. Unfortunately, this was like 8 years ago, so I no longer have the picture of the tire. As a precaution, I had some of my male friends go by and tell him to leave me alone. I never went back to that gas station and didn't have any issues with the guy after that. The worst part was I was 18, and when I told my mom what happened regarding the guy harassing me, she didn't believe me. Screw you, Bill. You're single because you're a creep. Story 8. I was spending time with an ex because he insisted he needed the company and we were still on friendly terms. I ended up having to kick him out of my house. He was acting crazy, keeping me up in non-intimate ways, just talking and stuff when I told him I needed to sleep and would kick him out if he continued disrupting my rest. He spent the following 3 days sleeping outside of my house and only left to get suitcases of his stuff, which he subsequently left by my back door. He would repeat this routine every few months until I moved, insisting he would hold my bike hostage until I stopped being a jerk and let him into my house. Needless to say, he never set foot in my home again. Story 9. Backpacking with my girlfriend, we're both women, and staying in a hostel. 6-bed, mixed dorm. All is well until it's just me, my girlfriend, and an old Indian guy in the room who is ridiculously drunk. We ordered pizza that night and he started shouting at us for not ordering him pizza in the common room. Eventually, he started telling people he wanted to marry my girlfriend, asked me if he could marry her, to which I said, no, go to bed, you're drunk, etc. Just anything to get him away from us. We went to bed eventually. He kept talking and talking about how much he liked my girlfriend, and I asked him to stop. He was making her uncomfortable and repeatedly said, go to sleep, which he didn't. He proceeded to start pleasuring himself over me and saying my girlfriend's name. I was bottom bunk and my girlfriend was top bunk. It was horrible. My girlfriend threw a bottle of water off his head and we both ran out of the room to go to reception to complain. He followed us. We had to complain about him pleasuring himself while he stood there. He flipped the frick out, threatened to murder us both, said he would murder the guy on reception, kept saying why would he do that over us cause we're disgusting. The hostel kicked him out, gave us a private room, but he stayed there and argued for hours. Even the police had to come. Story 10. So I really liked this guy in high school. He was kind of edgy and I was a pretty good kid. He asked if I wanted to skip school with him and naturally I was all for it. I walked to his house after getting dropped off at school and we watched movies. He eventually turns on adult content while we're kissing and making out and tries to put his hands down my pants. I was really nervous because I was a virgin, hadn't even touched a dong or anything at that point. I found my way out of there pretty quickly. I just kind of stopped talking to him, really because I wasn't ready to bang. And he decided to tell everyone he took my virginity and was really bad in bed. I was mortified. Now he's a hard drug addict, so I was like mildly holding out hope for this guy. Like OP was like, no, and he was just like, oh, cool, my bad or whatever, but no, not the direction that went. Lying about banging someone is just so, I don't know, sleazy, I guess? What a weird way to exert control over someone. It's just gross, man. Story 11. I went on a terrible date with a coworker. He got wasted and really embarrassed himself and me in front of a lot of people. I share a lot of my life on the internet, and I draw the line at going into detail of what happened that night. That's how bad it was. The next day, I gave a different male coworker a ride home, which was something that happened every Wednesday. The guy I went out with followed us, confronted our coworker and his wife about the affair I was having with him. I wasn't. Cried, and pulled an actual white picket fence out of the neighbor's yard and threw it at the dude. The police were called and it was just a whole thing. The best part of the story is that the good coworker was given a promotion, so he was the direct supervisor of both myself and the jerk. I didn't have to work with the jerk too much longer after that. Story 12. I'm a girl in the National Guard. Now, the Army's got this crap called SHARP. TLDR, the Army's attempt to do choose your own adventure for intimate harassment or assault. Half the time, it screws up and lets stuff happen. The other half, it throws the book at someone so hard they end up under the Library of Congress. Keep in mind, this dude's doing this with that over his head. This Navy Reserve dude I worked with tried to ask me out. I told him, nah, forget it, because that wasn't my jam. He was weird, so no, and I worked with him, so bigger no. I play on his team, so biggest no. So he didn't take it well. He started stalking me. As in, he managed to find out the name of my dog, what apartment block I live in, and the name of my girlfriend. Figured out who my tattoo artist was, managed to find out the exact make and model of my bike, and I never took it to drill. ever. Like, for God's sake, the dude found out the name and specialization of my major professor. So I'm weirded out as hell at this point because he showed up to our section one day, told me he knew all this and that I was going to go out with him or he was going to tell my platoon sergeant that I was being sexist towards him. So remember Sharp? Every unit is supposed to have a Sharp/EO rep, a point of contact for harassment, equal opportunity stuff for that unit. Our unit's rep? My platoon sergeant. I just let him go. Because, hey, let's have platoon daddy hear about how Snuffy here is stalking the crap out of me. Just make Sharp/EO stuff easier. After some fun paperwork, this dude managed to talk his butt right out of the Navy. Story 13. I was pregnant, out celebrating my birthday with my partner. We had been for dinner and decided to call in at a bar where all my friends were, as they wanted to wish me a happy birthday. Just before we left, I headed to the bathroom, and my partner and friends went outside for a cigarette. On my way back from the bathroom, a guy stopped me. He said something about my breasts and then attempted to motorboat me. I grabbed his chin and pushed his face away from me and went to walk away. He smashed a pint glass into the side of my face and punched me in the head several times. I was lucky there was a table behind me that I was able to grab onto, or else I would have fallen to the floor. He was thrown out by the bouncers, but it was up to myself and my friends to call the police to report what had happened. He was arrested, it went to court. He was found not guilty of intimate assault and pled guilty to just assault. He didn't get any jail time, and I got £180 compensation, which I received in £1 monthly payments. I'm sorry, how do you plead guilty to physical assault and only get £180 of compensation? No jail time? What happened here? This is like the lightest assault sentencing I've ever heard. OP, I hate that for you. I'm sorry. Story 14. I've got two. 1. A friend who had feelings for me who I rejected 5 years ago wouldn't stop trying to bring it up nicely to convince me. I stopped talking to him, but periodically he adds me on Facebook, which I reject. 2 weeks ago, he found my Insta and added me. We haven't talked since I made it very clear that it was a no. He's never been threatening, but it's just so frustrating he keeps trying. 2. My ex tried to booty call me post-relationship and I turned him down. He kept texting me after I stopped answering for the next hour. He started the attempt by implying I was a harlot, and he got engaged to the girl he was dating when he did this a month later. Oh boy, do I ever feel bad for that girl. Hopefully that marriage did not go through, with any luck. Because, hey, this is just an assumption, but I don't think he was the best partner. Story 15. My sister was murdered by her husband when she tried to leave him. The bullet didn't end her instantly, and he sat next to me in the ICU crying crocodile tears and telling me what a harlot she was. The story he gave police was that she shot herself. She was in a cast to her fingertips from the broken arm he gave her. I have no faith in police. I know there are many good people, but not there and not then. Thankfully, he's dead too. The world is better off. I was scared it was only a matter of time until it happened to someone else. I've got my own stories, but they pale in comparison. Story 16. When I broke up with my mentally, emotionally, and physically abusive ex of 4 years, he stabbed himself in the stomach because I wouldn't take him back. Then called me while apparently sitting in his car bleeding everywhere, and came up with an elaborate story about how he was dragged out of his car and attacked on a main road, with plenty of light, and a whole bunch of traffic cameras and surveillance cameras from stores. And surprisingly, not one caught anything. He ended up driving himself to the hospital and had to get emergency surgery. I was called the next day by a detective who told me it was self-inflicted. I immediately cut off all contact with him and any of our shared friends, but still felt guilty for months, thinking I caused someone to seriously injure themselves. Yep, and the guilt is exactly what they want. It's the level of control they want to exert over you when they do something like that. And it's unfortunate too, because it comes from a place of mental instability at the very least on their own end, which shows that things aren't great for them. Definitely a situation where they needed a lot of help, but OP, that doesn't make it your fault. But hey, I'm sure you know that by now. I'm probably preaching to the choir. Story 17. When I was about 16, I had my very first serious boyfriend. He was about 18 or 19 years old, senior in high school. He was very reserved, so in the beginning it was really nice. And when he started opening up, that was nice as well. I ended up sleeping at his house so much. I quite literally lived there with him while I was in high school. Now that I look back on it though, why the hell did my mom allow that? Anyway, I would never get to hang out with my friends anymore if I wanted to. He would draw me back in by being manipulative about it, and I just basically went to school practice and his house. Eventually, I just fell out of love with him over time. I lost all feelings towards him romantically, but I still cared about his well-being, so I tried to end it when I was 17 years old at this point, and he was in college. I would spend weekends with him there while I lived back at home. I was very straight up with him, but he really wouldn't take no for an answer. I tried being polite, but he just kept pushing me to be with him. He said he would end himself if I'm not with him. He goes as far as to send me a photo of a gun then a photo of a gun to his head. I immediately texted/called his mom to tell her what was going on. I never texted him back, and I never heard from his mom again. A few months after it ended, his grandparents called me asking if I had seen him, which was really weird. Story 18. I went over to my ex's to get some of my very expensive belongings he still had, and he made advances at me. I rejected him and tried to walk out of his house, and he slammed me down on his floor and choked me and threw my phone at a wall. Thankfully, it didn't break. He then proceeded to drag me into his bedroom and locked me in there for around 5 hours. And the entire time I was screaming, and his sister, who he lived with, did nothing. Eventually, a neighbor called the cops. He had a false imprisonment charge and an assault charge with a permanent restraining order. Story 19. Another student in the back room of my classroom area pinned me against the wall with my arms behind my back and tried to grope my chest. I was in primary school and 9 years old. He, I assume, the same age. I fought, and I shoved him back and managed to punch him in the face, despite being a tiny little Asian girl. He swore at me for breaking his nose, did nowhere near that damage, by the way, which is a shame, and he told the teacher I'd attacked him. I didn't know how to tell an adult someone had tried to assault me, so I got detention. He was a smug jerk in my same class for about the next 2 years. These are the entitled boys that become the men written about here. I just want to say, none of the people that we're reading about here are men. Quite simply, they are still those entitled boys. They just never grew up. That is really the only explanation I can have for this kind of behavior. Story 20. I've had some pretty horrible reactions on dating apps, but the worst was in high school. I told this guy I wasn't interested many times. I finally had to tell him slowly and loudly and in front of many witnesses that I wasn't interested and never would be, and would get school admin involved if he didn't leave me alone. Then the real harassment started, following me around school and onto my school bus, threats of violence, screaming all manner of delightful gender and sexuality-based slurs at me, meant to humiliate me in front of the rest of the school, driving by my house real slow, and he stalked me well into my 20s. Story 21. When I broke up with my first boyfriend, he refused to get off the phone with me. He argued with me for 2 hours that I must be banging someone else if I wanted to break up with him. I was dumb and young and didn't just hang up like I should have. He told every single one of our friends that I had cheated on him. Overnight, no one would talk to me. Not as bad as some others, but I just felt really bad and helpless about the whole situation for years, like I was the bad guy. Story 22. When I was in high school, I was talking to my best friend when some guy in her class came to say hi to her. When I got on MSN that night, my friend told me the guy had asked her if she could give him my MSN handle because he thought I was cute. I didn't want to, but my friend insisted, said he was really nice, so I caved and did it. Anytime I was online, he'd come to talk to me, but if we saw each other at school, he wouldn't say anything. Eventually, he told me he liked me and wanted to be my boyfriend. We'd only exchanged hi and how are you at that point. I told him we needed to know each other a little more than that, and I didn't want to be his girlfriend just because we'd said hi for like 3 days. He started sending messages still on MSN saying his life sucked, and he just wanted someone to like him. I told him, yeah, but I'd need to know more about him. He wrote back saying that his life sucked. Yeah, buddy, I got that. And he had to fake smile every day, and why didn't anyone like him? He was so nice. And I had to like him because his family life wasn't perfect. I was like, what the hell? He was basically trying to guilt me into going out with him. I got annoyed because things at home on my side weren't exactly peachy either. Told him to stop being so whiny and blocked him. Story 23. I ended an emotionally abusive relationship as it was beginning to escalate, and it wasn't pretty. It is still deeply uncomfortable for me to think about. I did go to his apartment to do it in person, but stood by the front door the whole time and refused to go inside further. Then when I tried to leave, he kept placing himself in front of me, so I had to go around him, all the way down the stairs and outside. Grabbed my arm, which scared me. When I finally got away from him and sped walked to my car, he stood on the sidewalk yelling at me while people stared. I lived about 30 minutes away with my parents. 15 minutes after I got home, he showed up on the porch and my dad had to make him leave. The last time I ever saw him, he was walking away from my house, but he wouldn't stop texting and calling me. All day, all night, for the next 3 days. I was afraid to block him because I was afraid he would threaten me, and I wouldn't have any warning. But eventually he got the message and stopped. It was awful. Story 24. My teenage ex stabbed himself in the abdomen when I broke up with him. It was nearly 20 years ago, but I can still remember it so clearly. The crying, begging, pleading, and then he grabbed a knife from my sink, dirty, it still had cream cheese on it from breakfast, and two-handed stabbed himself right in the abdomen. The look of horror on his face as he realized what he had done. So an ambulance was called. He had to have surgery and then got to spend some time in the psych ward. Several weeks later, he called me from the hospital to tell me our relationship was toxic and it would be best if we broke it off. I decided if it was best for his mental health to let him think that he was the one to choose to end it, then I would just let him believe that. Actually, following through with something like this Yeah, boy seriously needed help. Hopefully the psych ward actually did help, because sometimes it doesn't have the best track record after all. But I do really hope that people like this can get better in most cases. It's hard because they have to want to get better, but I hope. I don't want anyone to just stay a bad person. Story 25. I had to set up a date with a guy I met on Match. We had communicated via messaging and text for about a week or so. Hadn't met him yet. After I set up the meeting with him, I learned one of my best friends was coming into town for the weekend and wanted to get together. Friend was only going to be in town for that night. I texted my date and asked very nicely if we could reschedule to the next night and explained why. I wasn't rejecting him, I just needed to reschedule. He lost his mind. Called me all kinds of names, cursing along with it, and told me to never contact him again. Yeah, I just said okay. Figure I dodged a bullet. Also, I realized he'd probably been stood up a time or two and was jaded, but I would like to be judged by my own actions, not those of others. Hey, OP, for the record, even if this guy had been stood up before, a reaction that big is still his own problem, for sure. Not as bad as some others on here for sure, but still something to work out for himself. Story 26. The total D-bag move. Coworker asked me out. I said no. Before moving away from my desk, he called another girl, like, "Oh yeah, Daphne. Yeah, I'll pick you up Saturday. Yeah, I remember where you live, haha." Seriously, dude? I already couldn't stand you. You're really reinforcing my opinion right now. To win bonus points a few months later, this jerk decided to completely berate a girl in my and my coworker's hearing by coming into my department yelling on his phone to this poor unfortunate soul about what a psycho female dog she was and telling her she seriously needed mental help. I still sometimes think about that girl and hope she realized he was a manipulative dong. You know, I gotta say, as someone who's trying to get more into the dating scene or whatever, looking for people, I'm reading these stories and being like, hey, my odds, they can't be that bad. Because I know I am nowhere near as bad as at least, what did we make it to, 26? 26 people. Like, oh man, these were not good guys. It's funny, they got less intense for the last two, which is kind of unfortunate, I guess, if you're thinking about the proper... Well, no, it's probably good to end it on some calmer ones. I don't want to leave it off right in the thick of it, you know? So actually, no, it's probably good that we calmed down a bit at the end. Because some of these guys, quite frankly, just upset me. Has anyone watching this video had to reject someone and they didn't take it very well? If they have, throw them in the comments. These would probably be some pretty interesting ones to hear the personal stories of. But also, if you have and you don't want to share it, that's cool too, there's no pressure. But for now, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.